Do we have John Lewis on there?
He's not on yet, but he said he
Or
was.
Brent Edwards?
No, not yet.
Not yet, okay.
Got the blue screen of death. Computer's got to restart.
I hate that.
Good thing the commissioners are not here yet.
So John Lewis is going to be joining us shortly. He was in a snowcat trying to get back for the meeting. And Jeff Burton just indicated sitting in my doctor chair awaiting.
Well, how are you two?
Good, Commissioner.
Will we offer you a drink or a smoke or a... What do you want?
Website cord there.
Yeah, you're okay.
Thanks.
So, just a couple of commissioners. John Lewis is stuck in a snowcat.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, I got a text from Jim Harvey on that, and then Jeff Burton, one of our planning commissioners, he's stuck in a doctor's chair. So we got a few of them on there. So,
Don't know what to do. You know?
Good afternoon, all of you. It's 4 o'clock, and this is our joint work session for both the planning commissions. Rick, I've been overhearing your chatter. I think what we'll do is we'll hold up for about 3 or 4 minutes and then start this planning commission so that the others have another couple of minutes with their extenuating circumstances to join us. We appreciate that, so let's just put this on hold for 3 or 4 minutes and we'll start back up then. Is that all right?
perfect. Thanks, Commissioner.
Thank you, Rick. I've got you, Charlie Ewert, and I've got Commissioner Jenkins in the county building. Is that correct right now?
And Commissioner Frower just walked in.
Oh, wonderful. It looks as though now we've got 16 of us here. John, welcome. Ron?
Yeah, I see John now.
It's great to have you here. It appears by your count, John, I think we have quorums in both planning commissions. Is that correct?
Just checking. Let's see.
We've got the jerky-eating Ron Lackey that's joined us from up in the Upper Valley. I believe that's what that was just a moment ago. You should have hidden your camera, but tasty. Looks tasty.
Yeah, that might have been some gum.
Oh, yeah. Good fry. It wasn't gum. I could tell by the way you were exercising that jaw.
Commissioner Harvey, we do have a quorum on both sides of the commissions.
Wonderful. I appreciate that. I don't see Chair Edwards from the
He just walked in the room.
lower.
He just walked in the room. Just came in.
Fantastic, wonderful. Well, welcome. We appreciate all of you being here. To start things off on the agenda is a roll call. Chair Lewis, I'll have you do the Upper Valley, and Chair Edwards, when he's finished, I'll have you take the Western Weaver. So go ahead, John.
Okay, appreciate it. We're from the Upper Valley, Ogden Valley Planning Commission. Today we have in attendance Commissioner Hogue, Howell, Lackey, and Francis, and myself, Lewis. I think at this point absent are Commissioners Waldrop and Burton.
Very good. Thank you. Chair Edwards?
All right, thank you, Commissioner Harvey. Looks like from the Western Weaver Commission, we have in attendance today Commissioner Favero, Commissioner Andriotti, Commissioner Nelson, Commissioner McCormick, Commissioner Bell, And it looks like, oh, Commissioner Wickern just joined us, so looks like we have our whole quorum here with us this afternoon, so.
So the mic's.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much.
Okay. We changed
We
that.
appreciate all of you being here, and we appreciate your service again very much to both boards. If I refer to Commissioner McCormick as Uncle Jed, just know that we're not related. Okay, for a Pledge of Allegiance, Charlie, if you would lead us in the pledge, please. Thank you.
Please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
One nation under God,
indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
Hard to do when we're all on our own.
Yeah. A little blade there. I'm not sure we need a pledge next time we do this.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Our work session today, and it might be good for the others who've joined us, that we're really not accepting public comments at this time, unless asked by one of the planning commissioner, or the chairs of the planning commissions. We ask that you in the public please mute. You're always welcome to join us, and we appreciate your attendance. The first item on our agenda under WS1 is the substandard roads and subdivision drainage facilities. Rick Grover, our planning director, there's some concerns regarding connectivity. If you'd go ahead with that.
Thanks.
And then, commissioners, I apologize, but I just got a call and I'm going to go do a test. And so after this item, I'm going to turn the time over to the vice chair, which is Scott Jenkins at this time. So thank you. Rick, go ahead.
Thanks, Commissioner Harvey. The commissioners a while back asked us to look at the substandard roads in the county and connectivity throughout the county, and how do we deal with substandard roads. And so we approached this, and we brought some proposed language to the Planning Commission on this to look at how we handle substandard roads. And they had some concerns. Both sides of the commission had some concerns on the substandard road language.
Well, this goes way back.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
I kind of forgot about it.
Yeah, and so what we'd like to do is just have a joint meeting with the two planning commissions and you as the commissioners, and just kind of have a little dialogue of what's going on. But what I've done is I've asked Charlie to kind of go through the ordinance in a nutshell, and in Charlie's nutshell. Not in our nutshell, and just explain a little bit and refresh you on what the existing the proposed language is in the ordinance.
Didn't you, you actually did an inventory, didn't we? Of
We
these
did.
roads?
We did.
Yeah, I remember this now.
Yeah, we went through all of the county on
That's
Western
right.
Weaver and Ogden Valley side, and we identified where the substandard roads were and which ones are ranked in higher priority to lesser.
That's right. So we've actually got an inventory of this, Gage.
Yeah, I remember that last year.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I go early last year, though. This was been some time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that.
So,
Yeah, you're right.
So Charlie, if you wouldn't mind
Can do.
doing that.
I've got the blue screen of death just so you guys can see. So I've got a presentation coming for you, but the computer's just restarting here.
Okay.
The substandard road thing, we actually put two topics together. One was drainage facilities, and the other one is substandard roads. And we were just looking to change two different sections of the code just in one step and not have to run two different processes for it. The first part is in terms of drainage facilities. And actually, it's in the subdivision code, and it talks about easements that are required. We just wanted to make a couple adjustments to our easement language to say that we were having some issues with cluster subdivisions. Cluster subdivisions are allowed to have side setbacks. The lots are allowed to have side setbacks as small as 8 feet. But our subdivision code says you have to have at least a 10-foot public utility easement along one side. We've got a lot of surveyors in the county who's done a lot of work here. They're just used to the 10 feet. So what we did there, 10 feet on the sides and 10 feet on the front, we amended that paragraph essentially, or we're proposing to amend that paragraph to say that that side easement, it's not required unless the county engineer determines it is required based on whatever utilities are necessary. The front easement is 10 feet unless the county engineer waives that, or unless it's a 0 front setback, in which case if it's a 0 front setback, those utilities would be in the right of way, because we'd have a wider right of way in those cases. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, so one of the challenges that's wrapped into that paragraph is drainage easements. And this came up as a problem out in western Weber County. There's a lot of drainage issues, it's pretty flat up there, and the question is how to get water from these new subdivisions, or water runoff from these new subdivisions out into a typical drainage channel, which can then go off to wherever it needs to go, whatever evaporation pond or percolation pond or the lake or whatever it is. We have a couple of examples of subdivisions going in where drainage wasn't considered, and it pushed a lot of water onto adjacent farm fields. We've also got on the flip side of that, we've got another issue, which is you've got farmers who have a lot of tailwater, and that tailwater has historically just been allowed to flow off, and their neighbors have been happy to get a little bit more water in their crop, and so it hasn't been a concern until the neighbor subdivides. And what happens with that tailwater once that farmer chooses to flood irrigate again? So who's responsible for building those drainage facilities is part of the primary question. We went back and forth. Should the developer build the drainage facilities even if it's the farmer's tailwater? Should the farmer be responsible for building the drainage facilities because it is his tailwater? We kind of came to what I think was a pretty good conclusion, but the Planning Commission still wanted to have a discussion with you guys to make sure that it's pretty clear what the issues are. And that is that if there has been a historically established tailwater flow off of the farmer's property and onto where now the developer is developing, then the developer is responsible for putting in a ditch and capturing that tailwater, and then figuring out how to channel that ditch into whatever drainage system we have. If there hasn't been a historic flow off, but the developer has had a flow off of their property, then the developer again is responsible for putting the ditch in. Otherwise, if the farmer wanted a ditch, the farmer would put the ditch in. The developer wanted the ditch, the developer would put the ditch in. The Western Weber Planning Commission really wanted to see some strong language to suggest that the developers need to put some kind of perimeter catch ditch in with an easement that then routes that water to an appropriate place.
So in these kind of deals where it's a developer, don't they normally require wastewater basins so that the subdivision holds its water and it meters out at a certain rate?
For
Yes.
stormwater, yes.
Right. So isn't this stormwater we're talking about in a subdivision?
This is the ditch water.
This is irrigation.
Yeah, I understand
It's
that. But
both.
when you said the developer, I assumed in the development it'd be stormwater,
Yep.
and it goes into the same waste ditch.
Yeah, in some cases you're looking at water that is
Usually.
bubbling up as well. So you've got really high water tables in some of these areas. And so people put land drains in that then surface the water and move the water somewhere else.
Well, they do, absolutely.
And so there's a lot of different water considerations. Yes, they need to have a detention basin. They have to do 100% site containment unless it's absolutely impossible for them to do. They can get an exception from the county engineer.
Well, so these waste ditches now for wastewater, they're historical.
That's
I mean,
one of the challenges.
There is not one area that there is not a waste ditch in.
Right.
And if there was one that was a block or two away, they would simply dig a path into it.
right.
Where we want rights of ways, things like that to handle this, we have a prescriptive right of way there in a wastewater ditch because it's been there for so
Yeah.
many generations. Yeah, so you're not trying to reinvent anything
No.
here.
No,
Okay.
and there was a lot of question about that subject, especially coming from the county engineer's office.
Mhm.
They are, after talking with legal and everything like that, they warmed up to the idea that our right-of-way facilities also have to double as something for the tailwater or the drainage facility off of the property.
Sure.
It's just
Just
going to have
right.
to happen.
So Charlie, what you're saying is if it's farmer that historically used that ditch going into a development, that ditch then becomes, the tailwater becomes responsibility of the developer, not the farmer.
That's right.
Which I agree with that. I don't think we should harm a farmer just because his neighbor decides to develop.
Right.
The other side of that is if the developer buys a parcel that now creates water, wastewater, tailwater, whatever, we're asking them to contain it.
Yep.
Or do something with that water.
In both cases, the developer would be responsible for building some kind of a detention facility to capture and store the water,
Okay.
or off channel.
You're holding the farmer and the seller of that property, who was probably a farmer, harmless from going in and creating additional infrastructure.
Right.
Is that what you're telling me?
Yes, that's the intention.
Okay.
And protecting the farmer from the developer's water flowing over into the farmer's field and destroying
Yeah,
that crop.
yeah, that's only fair. I don't disagree with
I
that
do.
concept.
So it's interesting, you have something a little historical that took place there.
Of not knowing whether we really should be monitoring, overseeing, and ensuring compliance or not. And so it's really helpful if the legislature is very clear.
Okay, I think that was a different subject.
Okay, so in this expansion of 12th Street, as we've gone out there and done that, Gary Meyer in our engineering department engineered what I would call a somewhat new concept here in these waste ditches where they serve also as land drains. And so we over gravelled the spot and wrapped the pipe, and there was a lot of concern whether that was even going to work. I know Randy Marriott came in here and visited with us and took us out and looked at it and said this is BS, it won't work. Well, in the end, it actually worked pretty good. Gary done a pretty good job there in engineering this, and it's working very well. So I suspect under that scenario, we'll see much more of that.
Yeah. It's actually, I think, going to be coming down the pipeline as a proposal in our cross sections. So we're proposing cross sections, and we'll have that there. Okay.
So you have an alternative for those developers to use that historic waste ditch to dump their water in.
Right.
And we've now, at least on 12th Street, made arrangements for that.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's working in year one pretty good. Now, it'll be interesting to see what happens when spring gets here.
I'm sure we'll hear from Randy in the spring.
I'm sure we will too. But as of today, it's actually working pretty good. And wouldn't you agree with that? Don't you live out there? Yeah.
You don't see an issue with that?
Not yet, but it's been awfully dry.
Yeah, I was to say this.
Good point.
wait for a wet spring if we have one. Let's hope we do.
We hope so.
All right.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. So I think we've got a solution for you there. As far as substandard roads go, we've got a challenge when it comes to developing at the end of a substandard road where there is no secondary egress. So you got it one way in, one way out. We've got a lot of these substandard roads, and a number of them, and in a dead-end road.
Well, that's exactly where Brad Blanche is.
I'm trying not to bring up any specifics.
Yeah, well, I understand, but his isn't the only road. There's lots of roads like that.
Yeah, in fact, we've done a couple of, maybe 3 different developments.
We have one of those in Ogden Valley.
Yeah.
Marta?
Oh, Brad's on the line.
Brad's there.
I
was talking about you, Brad.
Is the link to Zoom in the Western Weaver agenda?
It
Or
should
where?
be Western Weaver and Ogden Valley.
Both of them.
Yeah. Do you need me to send it to you?
I think it'll be faster just for me to pull it up here. Okay. So we've got a couple of different challenges here, and for some reason this specific subject seems to follow me around in my career because we've had to address it. I've had to address it before. So one of the great things about smart growth is essentially allowing growth to organically expand instead of creating a circumstance where it can leapfrog and jump over things. When we're looking at allowing development at the end of a dead-end road, hopefully, in time, we'll see some kind of a street network go out to that development and capture it, so it's not permanently at the end of the dead end road. It's not always going to be the case if we're talking about a canyon where development goes up and there's no way out again. That is going to be the case if we've got just development that's happening at the end of these long dead-end roads where we know there can be a grid system implemented in time. There's a few things that we're working on to try and help with that. We're working on creating a master street plan for the Western Weber County, and that's going to be part of the general plan that's coming up. Creating where we believe those future streets should go. So as developers come in, we could say, this is where a street's going to go. You got to install it somewhere within this second year.
That's good.
Marta, is it set up so I could share my screen?
I think so. Let me see.
There you go.
There we go. Okay. So the challenge that we have is who pays for the road as it expands? I mean, that's the big question, right? Should a developer be able to develop at the end of the road, put a bunch of houses at the end of that road, with the road being substandard? And if that developer does, at some point, the traffic counts obviously increase because you're putting more houses in there. And at some threshold, you're going to have to rebuild that road and build it to an actual decent standard that can handle the flows. Now, it doesn't really matter if we're talking about a standard, a road that meets today's standards. Let's say it meets today's standards, but we've got 10,000 homes that are then located at the end of it. Well, it's not going to meet a new standard. You know, at some point, the level of service is going to deteriorate to the point that we've got to expand it to a collector road or an arterial road. And so, looking at these 16-foot wide asphalt roads that are in some of these locations, and saying that's substandard, there's nothing the developer can do about it. That's not an isolated incident. Right, it'll be the same thing if it's a collector that needs to be converted to an arterial. Now, hopefully, a collector converting to an arterial has a second way out. We're not talking about substandard roads, 16-foot wide roads that have two ways out. I've got a pretty good example. I'll pull up on a map in just a minute of that idea. But looking at this map here, just going to want to walk you through some of the organic changes. So this is 7500 West. I'm just making up lot lines here. It's kind of hard to see up there, but those black lines, those are lot lines, and the numbers indicate parcels. These are really large parcels. So let's just say they're residential parcels. There's a house on each one of them. And that red polygon, number 11, that gentleman wants, or lady wants to develop their land, okay? But 7500 West, if you've driven down it recently, we know that that's a substandard road. In some places, the width of it, it's hard to pass two cars down. It's actually one of the wider ones compared to the rest of the substandard roads. But just for the sake of the discussion, let's say it's, I don't know, maybe 18 feet wide of asphalt. Developer at the very end wants to put 100 new lots in there. But we know that that road, according to the standard that we've adopted, which is 66-foot wide right-of-way with 36 feet of asphalt, we know that that is what is supposed to be installed in order to support this kind of traffic load, right? And so, just so it's easier to see, you've got your existing development is black, your new development is red. This is an example, and I just kind of patched things together because I didn't have a ton of time to create a graphic for you, but this is an example of our cross-section now, 66-foot wide with a 36-foot road section. Incidentally, off on the sides, you see...
So that's a collector road, though?
That's a local collector. Yep.
Right.
We don't have a standard that's less than this right now. We will be proposing a standard for this.
Okay.
There's a difference between, even a dead-end road can become a collector road if there's enough homes along it.
Right.
12th Street, 900 South, for example, perfect example, would be a collector if not an arterial at some point. We'll be proposing a local neighborhood road. In fact, a couple of different cross-sections for local neighborhood roads. But for the sake of the discussion here, we're talking about 66 feet and right-of-way and 36-foot roadway sections. And don't pay too much attention to the drawing. It shows the drainage swells and the edge of the right-of-way being in the center of the drainage swells. Our drainage swells are completely inside of the 66 feet, okay? But just for the sake of discussion. So in this imaginary road here that may or may not be 7500 west, we know that the right-of-way is pretty narrow, right? We don't know exactly what that right-of-way is. We know that the courts say that the right-of-way is as wide as is reasonable and necessary to maintain safe two-way vehicle traffic when a right-of-way is not defined. So all of these lot owners own out to the center of the right-of-way, and we know that we could go to court and argue, all right, this is what is required for safe two-way travel. At some point in time, jurisdiction argued that their 66-foot wide right-of-way is what they need for safe two-way travel, and that's what they adopted, and they wouldn't have adopted that if that's not what they needed. And their argument was snow storage, and it was drainage, and all that kind of stuff. Well, the court said, nah, that's too much. That's not what you need. That's not the prescriptive right that essentially the public has there. So the question here, as we expand to 66-foot right-of-way, is this guy who's putting in 100 new lots at the end, is it the county's responsibility to go out and acquire that right-of-way, or is it his responsibility to go out and acquire that right-of-way? In the case of expanding the asphalt there, is it the county's responsibility for expanding the asphalt, or is it the developer's responsibility for expanding the asphalt? There is an argument to be made that so the developer's responsibility under the current code could be just the stretch that's out front. Now it's going to look a little weird. You'll have a really nice road out in the middle of nowhere on the end of a dead-end road, but at some point in time, the lot owners of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, as long as they've got development potential, they will come in and they'll ask to subdivide, and then you could get that road to kind of slowly creep down progressively until you get to the developer's property.
And that's a common practice.
That is right.
Mm-hmm. That happens all the time today.
That is what our current code would suggest.
Right.
Well, actually, let me back up just a little bit. Our current code would suggest that the developer who wants the 100 new lots, he can't get it until that road has been built to the standard that goes all the way down to him.
Without an exception.
Without any exception, that's right. And so what I understood the desire was to help kind of carve out an exception to allow that developer to go ahead with his development, especially if you've got lot owners of 1 through 10 who just frankly never intended to develop. I mean, it could be an entire lifetime before the developer, that road ever gets out to that 100 lot desired subdivision. So on the one hand,
in the past, this has all been based on the amount of traffic.
Right.
Yes.
Right. If a guy's doing a 10 or 15 lot subdivision, well, then he ends up, his responsibility is just that little piece of road in front of the subdivision.
Right.
If it ends up being 100 lot or 150, then traffic's high enough that it reaches another standard.
That's right. That's exactly right. So the level of service deteriorates with every new subdivision.
Right.
So the proposal that we've run through the Planning Commission, both Planning Commissions, frankly, is that there is an exception that is made, essentially, that allows a developer to go ahead and install. Probably wouldn't be 100 new lots, but it might be 10, because the amount of the deterioration of level of service on that road is going to be pretty minuscule with 10 homes, but with 100 it's going to be noticeable, right?
Right.
They'd have to get the sign off of the county engineer and the planning director in order to...
Plus the expense of the road when you're running it. I mean, I don't want to sound like a capitalist here too much, but we are capitalists. The fact of the matter is these people want to develop, they have to attach the expense of this to the price of the lot.
Right.
And so, you know, when it's 10 lots, the expense is too high. When it's 100 lots, you divide it out and the expense comes down where it's more reasonable.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I think, that situation we had in the valley is a perfect example where that was on a dead-end road. We gave him the exception. I think he was putting in 8 to 10 lots,
Right.
smaller subdivision. And by ordinance, if we made him go back, he'd be required to go back 2 miles of paved road that's been there since I've been there, which is over 60 years. That they're probably
Almost 70 years.
there's probably close to 80 to 100 people that have been using that road forever. And so if it's a substandard road, why all of a sudden it's become substandard because they decide to put in a subdivision? So my question is, number one, why do we only apply this if it doesn't have an alternative access?
Right.
And why do we ignore it until that point? If it's a substandard road, it's substandard, then the people that are using that road and have been using that road for the last 50 years should contribute.
Yeah.
It's not fair. And that's exactly what happened. He looked at that and goes, so I'm gonna have 10 lots here. It's $2.5 million to take this back to the intersection where it's a standard, well, it's actually probably to make it a standard road, you have to go back 3.5 to 4 miles.
Right.
So it takes it out of even the realm of possibility to develop.
That's true, it does.
And so, you just can't do it.
Would your trips per day be less?
If you take it into consideration, if we're going to try to impose the burden onto the existing lot owners, why would lot owner of lot 1 pay for that full length of that improved road?
We're not suggesting that, we're just saying what's fair for the person that develops that. Nobody's made the statement that the one should pay for it.
Right.
The question comes down is what should the 100 new lot subdivision owner pay?
Yeah, that's the real question.
That's the question.
So the proposal that sorry.
But the substandard, it might not be substandard today because the trips per day up and down that road, because of, there's only say 10 homes. Average is what, 3 trips per day per lot? So
10 trips per day.
Or 10 trips per day. So you're running, 100 cars up and down that road. Well, that's going to change from 100 to 1,100 once you add that 100 lots in there. So that's going to change the use from a substandard road. It could be acceptable with the 10 lots, but those extra 1,000 trips now make it substandard in my eyes.
Well, and you've got to admit something here. And that is, all those roads are substandard.
Yeah,
that's just all it is.
Yeah.
I mean, in my family, there's a conversation that took place the day they run that road in front of my house. And it was decided it was going to go one way, and when my uncle got home from work that day, it was a whole different direction than they agreed on. He said, "What just happened?" And they said, "Well, turns out that your son's the county commissioner." And they decided they was going to change it. Now, I don't know if that's really true or not, but my point is, that's how they used to build roads. They put a little gravel on the ground and put asphalt over it, and geez, literally, they did it in days.
A lot of them don't even have asphalt. A lot of them's just pea gravel with oil.
Yeah, with oil. I agree with that.
Yeah.
And they get a little bit wider and a little bit wider every time the asphalter goes out there because you get add a couple inches each time.
Yeah, it's true.
Evolution of roadways is something I put a lot of effort into doing research on at some point earlier in my career. So thinking about
quick question.
Yes. Who's this?
This is Shanna.
Go ahead, Shanna.
Francis from Valley. Should I wait till the end of the conversation, or shall I ask my question now?
Go ahead and ask it now.
I'm wondering, it seems like that historically what is, how things have been done according to roadways is that there is a master plan. For instance, in Ogden you have large main arteries, Harrison, Washington, the old highway, even out in the county. So that's all planned out in advance, where your main roads are, and then in between the smaller, and then maybe halfway between the large arterial roads, there'll be a semi-large road. So I'm a little confused of this conversation because I would think that those have already been platted out where the how wide they should be in a master plan, except at different sections of land or wherever. And then when someone finally decides they'd like to build or put in a subdivision, that would already be decided how wide that road would be according to the master plan. And then that's how wide it would be. Could you shed some light on that? Is there a master plan for out in the western part of the county for roadways as such? I know there are some main roads there now, but I'm just thinking the width and all of that should be have been decided pretty much in advance.
So we do have, it's actually an unadopted transportation master plan that suggests what the road rights-of-way should be. That unadopted document actually has been implemented through our impact fee facilities plan so that we could spend money on improvements that have been indicated in those documents. However, yeah, in Western Weaver County, as part of the general plan, we will be working on exactly what you're saying. It's essentially saying our transportation plan shows that these roads need to be this wide or this type of right. That way we know exactly what the developer needs to install. That's a slightly different subject, Commissioner Francis.
But her concept of asking it is true.
Yeah.
The fact that conceptually these are out there, and they are. They're listed, and when we tell people when they build on a major road and their setback comes in, we tell them about how far the back they have to build because we anticipate the day will come where that'll be a 66, a 76, an 86, or whatever.
And when we do the subdivision, we require that dedication.
And if I may interject quickly, one more thing, and I would think all of that, for instance, on the example that you've shown right here that's up on our screen, is that master transportation plan would be coordinated with the zoning of the region.
Right.
Because the zoning would suggest what the density eventually is going to be on the width of those roads, because what is currently allowed. So, if it's low density or higher density, that would be the determining factors in large part measure also on the width of the roads.
Yep, you got it.
Because of the potential.
That's correct.
Yep. Yeah, and that's exactly how they would do it. In fact, if you look at the Ogden Valley Transportation Master Plan, it does show road rights of way widths throughout the valley on existing roads as well as on potential future roads.
So Charlie, what's the point here you're driving on this? Do you want to change this? Because this is the way it's been operated for years and it's worked fairly successfully.
Right. I'm not quite sure what you mean by change. Let me...
Well, that's why I'm here. I'm not quite sure what you mean.
So just having a look at the progressive changes over time. If we're looking at smart growth principles, we would be essentially, and this was what Western Weaver Planning Commission said. They said, we want to have a work session with the county commission because we want to convey this principle. Smart growth would suggest that in time, the road will get there and the developer can develop at that time. One planning commissioner mentioned to me in real estate development, there's one rule: location, location, location. And so, the developer can move out. Can the developer move out to a hard-to-reach place, pay a lower dollar because there aren't any facilities that go out to it, and then ask somebody else to install those facilities? What I've done in an attempt to try and capture what the request was in allowing development at the end of a substandard road is created essentially proposed a set of rules. The financial cost of providing all of the new improvements getting out to that 100-lot subdivision, it should be borne primarily by the developer because he's the one who's bringing up the demand for service along that roadway, above and beyond what it currently is. I'm really sensitive, and I like what Commissioner Froer, what you said. If it was a substandard road for the 10 lots, it was a substandard road to begin with, which is 100% true. This is the way that the impact fee code goes. You can't use impact fees to fix an existing deficiency, but you can use impact fees to expand a roadway where adding new lots would create a new deficiency. So look at a road as if
Which
it's
is the purpose and really the definition of an impact fee.
That's right.
And the way they should be used versus what some cities and counties are using it for.
Yeah, and if you look at what Weber County has, we're just not putting enough rooftops in to put enough money in there to actually do a lot of these road facilities.
I think what you're saying is, that, again, it comes down to if it's 100 lot, then that's going to be a major impact on that road. If it's 5 to 10 lots, are you going to require somebody to spend another $500,000 for development?
So what I'm suggesting is somewhere right in the middle of that.
Okay.
Because if it's 10 lots at a time, if we say, all right, here's your threshold, 10 lots, and I want to do 100 lots, well, I'll do 10. And then I'll do 10 the next day, and then I'll do 10 the next day to kind of go around that. My suggestion is to essentially capture what the cost is to improve the road to whatever level of service it needs to be to serve how many lots are there, and apply that cost to each new home. Now, that wouldn't be the cost of the existing deficiencies in the road. It would just be the cost of expanding the road above and beyond the existing deficiencies in order to provide for whether it be 10 lots or 100 lots. This is the exact same thing that we do now. We just do it through a deferral agreement. All right, if you're, let's say, lot owner of lot 6 develops, he splits it into 2 and puts another house on there. We're not going to require him to throw out some road base and asphalt right out front. It just doesn't make sense to have that there and then have the road go wide and then narrow and then wide and then narrow, especially on flat ground like this where you need some pitches and some inclines and declines in order to get the water to flow off correctly. And so it's better for him to just...
I've got a question.
Yes, go ahead.
I have a question, if I can get in here.
Go ahead.
Yeah, if there's no subdivision down there, and that road's a substandard road, we gonna leave it to be a substandard road forever? So are we gonna have a plan that's gonna start upgrading these roads? And then the other part is to me, if we gotta improve the roads anywhere, where do we get the money? I mean, is it just taxpayer money, or can we get grants? Can we get things? Because in my mind, even at 100 lots down there, I don't think it's right to put that on solely on the developer. Because if he's not there, the way we've been running in the past is that road, that particular road going down to Ogden Bay, North Run, is going to be like that forever. So is that what we're talking about? If there's no new subdivision, then a substandard road's gonna be that forever?
Do you want me to answer that?
Please.
Wayne, that's a very interesting question. You'd ask that. And so, first of all, when you talk about grants that are available to develop and resurface and redo roads, the state does theirs, and then we get money from the state through our taxes, through our gas taxes, and we put that money aside and slowly get into it and develop. You get B&C road funds, and this road would be a B&C road.
Correct.
And so that is the only money that's available, is gas tax money. Really, it comes in different increments in different ways, but it's all gas tax money, and that's really what's available. So then the answer to your question, is that going to be that kind of a road forever? Well, if nobody ever develops on it, the answer is yeah, that's exactly what that'll be. And the reason that we asked when we came in them to do a inventory on the roads is so we could determine the very question you asked, is what roads are what and who owns them, and are there any that are dedicated to the road width. You can see when we resurfaced and redid 12th Street, there was probably, I'm guessing now, 20% of the cost of that was acquiring those small parcels of roadway to expand into to meet the widths that were required. And so it'll be the same thing here. Every one of those, if the county goes in and does it, every one of those will have to be acquired and purchased. And then if that's the case, is it fair for the people in Pleasant View? Well, this is unincorporated county. So crap. Now your taxes just go up again because we got to start redoing the roads out there. It ends up being very expensive.
Are roads paid for out of the municipal services fund, or is that general fund, or both?
Municipal services out there.
Service.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about like WFRC funds and stuff like that?
Nah.
You can get funding to redo roads through them.
You can, but
It's not as much. It's
not as much, and it's small and it's incremental, and the county, frankly, we work through the FRC funds that we get, and we have through WACOG, we have a committee that sits there and allocates that out, and all the cities share in that equally, as would the unincorporated part of the county as a city.
Yeah.
And generally it goes to demand.
We're
Wayne's
waiting.
question on this road, the demand just isn't there to upgrade it.
Yeah, if the demand was there and you applied for it, I mean, you could go in and get the funding.
Our chances would go way up.
Yeah.
Sure, that's right.
That's in the grant option.
But boy, it'd be.
Oh yeah, the way it sits today, it wouldn't apply. You don't check the boxes, but they're.
But even if it did start applying, your odds of receiving it, unless it got really bad, when we sit down and go through those darn things, like we looked the other day at 2nd Street between Washington and Wall Avenue. Well, that's a sleepy little street, I didn't think that was even used. Well, in our travel, we went out there and sat on that street for a few minutes and talked. I was shocked. There was 40, 50 cars a minute going up and down that road. I couldn't believe how many were. Oh, not 40 or 50, but 15 or 20. I mean, it was heavily traveled. I was shocked by that.
Yeah.
So, and those are the kind of projects that this little road would be competing against. That's why it makes it so tough.
So, in the proposed language that you'll, I think, have coming to you, it still hasn't gotten out of Western Weaver County yet for whether it be for a recommendation for approval or denial. But what we've crafted to try and get this a little bit closer to where you guys want to be is an obligation on the developer, which he would then tie to each lot, and so it would be rolled into the cost because it would be assigned to the title. Both a deferral agreement, which is what we would all otherwise do anyway.
They do that anyway.
Mm-hmm. And an agreement to not protest if the county decides to create a special assessment area. And I worked through the attorney's office on that and looked at state code and tried to figure out exactly how to word it in a way where we could say, essentially, that if they do choose to protest a special assessment area, the county doesn't have to count the protest.
Huh.
Now, I'm not suggesting you should do it. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't, but I am proposing it as a possible alternative to raise money. Because if you're going to do a special assessment area, you're looking at lots 1 through 10. If the road is substandard for lots 1 through 10, the lot owners of 1 through 10 should be paying, right? Because they're the only ones who use it, to bring it up to a standard. And so, say all 10 of those lot owners were to complain to you guys that it needs to be improved, you could apply a special assessment area to the property. 10 lot owners probably won't bring in enough revenue for that, but pretending like it does, and then slowly bring in enough revenue, borrow against the amount of money brought in by the special assessment area, install the road, and then have their increased special assessment pay it off until it's done, and then the special assessment goes away. That, in my mind, is the only way, other than the funds that you were mentioning, and already putting those funds into a match to get grants or whatever to bring each one of these roads up to standard. The other thing, answering Wayne's question, is, you know, if you could put 100 lots on that red polygon, then you could probably put 50 or 60 on any one of the other polygons. So each one of those landowners at some point in time is going to develop. It's just a matter of cost and timing. And so new improvements, expansions will come with each of those. So Ogden Valley Planning Commission, they're like, gosh, we don't know if we want to obligate someone to, by virtue of a contract recorded on title to their lot, to not be able to protest. There was a little bit of confusion on what it means to not protest. They could still come to the public hearing and call you all kinds of names and, you know, call you out for raising taxes or applying a special assessment area. But under state code, a written protest has to be counted, and if you have a certain amount of protests, then the special assessment area cannot be applied. And so all 100 of those lot owners, let's say they all file a protest, that's 100 votes against a protest that you wouldn't apply. There are a bunch of different ways to protest. You can protest.
So this is why normally you make the developer do this, so you don't have protest areas, and it's hooked to the price of the lot, and it solves all the problems, right?
That's right. And that, I think that's the trouble. There's the rub right there.
That's the rub.
Or you go back to exactly what Western Weaver Planning Commission was saying, is to say, well, developer, you're just going to have to wait till that road gets to you. And the cost to, or the cost to develop it from there to there, you know, to your development is not so astronomical. So that's the suggestion.
Is it okay if I ask a question or make a statement?
Sure, who's this?
This is Commissioner Wickern.
Good, go ahead, Commissioner.
I think what Commissioner Jenkins has been saying about right-of-way, that truly is a problem, and that's, I think, the two issues I see that I'm concerned about with adding, you know, how many lots to the end of a substandard road. Well, basically, the two would be the right-of-way is quite an issue, because even if we find out we need to improve that road, retroactively widening a street is a very long process. And especially if we need to go through, you know, capturing land that with a special assessment, et cetera. However that happens, retroactively getting the land we need, I think would be very prohibitive. And I think we'd be 10 years down the road before we had a serviceable, you know, had the road actually service the community. So I'm worried that not having at least the right of way out to that 100 lots is going to cause quite a problem. The other big concern is the cost of those lots that far away from the county are more than just building a road out to those lots. We have students going to schools that need to be collected in school buses, fire, and all sorts of services that need to reach out further. And so if it's, you know, kind of reaching out to the end instead of organically growing that street where we have developers paying as they go, then I think it puts a burden on the community. And while we want growth, I don't think that growth would be proportionate. You know, the taxes we gain from those 100 new lots, I don't think that will be proportionate to the burden that they're putting on the community, even more than just this road, thinking down the road what would happen.
Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of science that says, yeah, residential doesn't pay its own way, yeah. Especially if they're primary residences.
Well, to her point,
that's correct.
This is extreme. That's what she's saying. This is extreme enough. In fact, this is exactly why there should have been a city out there. And the reason is, you know, you really question now whether 100 lot subdivision at that location, as long as we're doing this on, this is just a what if.
Hypothetical.
Shouldn't even be allowed because we can't service it out there. Too much.
So our current code says, no, it's not allowed.
So sorry, Charlie, to interrupt.
Oh, you're okay, Wayne.
To your point, Commissioner Jenkins, that's kind of why we landed where we did as far as the Western Planning Commission was, because at what point do you impose a burden on existing landowners simply because the developer wants to maximize the development on the property. I get that we want to allow developers to develop, but at the cost of existing landowners, I can't wrap my head around that.
Well, this is an extreme case here, and I admit it. You've got a road between you and the main road, and you've got all that.
We've seen
It makes it tough.
come through very similar to this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just roads too. I mean, there's not other facilities out there that would allow something like this to go. They're going to have to upgrade water. What are they going to do with their wastewater? There's a lot of other
Yeah,
things.
you're right.
I mean, a water district would make them 100 lots would take probably an 8 or a 10-inch line. You know, for fire flow and stuff, they're going to make them go back as far as they need to get that to bring it, because that's probably a 6-inch water line in that road or smaller.
Yeah,
you know,
smaller, yeah.
And that's going to be another burden that would have to go on the developer at that time too. So,
Correct.
Chair Edwards, to your point, does this get to a point where then all on its own, organically, the builder says, well, we can't build there because it's going to be too expensive?
My personal opinion, yes.
Yeah. So that should be what limits it then, Gage, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's cost, which is what's exists today, you know.
Yeah.
Nobody's gonna put in there a 100-lot subdivision and not be able to pay for their cost of infrastructure and hopefully make some profit on it. You know, there comes a point economic-wise where this becomes unfeasible.
Yeah.
You know, developers aren't that smart, but a lot of them aren't that stupid. So,
What
you know, let's give them a little credit. They just don't go turning dirt into lots unless there's a potential for a potential buyer.
Right. What happens here is the value of land has moved enough just recently that all of a sudden parcels like this now come into play.
Yeah, they do.
That's true.
Yep.
So the proposal that...
And we,
Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
sorry, I was going to say at that point, if the developer is willing to put that entire road in with the services,
Right.
Then it makes sense and it'll open up development on all the other lots going to it. And is that fair to that developer? Well, I just think he would have to make the decision, because as a county, it's better for us if he buys lot 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, on down, than for him to grab up the one furthest away.
I mean, he has the option. I mean, he could always get a pioneering agreement, but those are only good for 7 to 10 years.
10 years max. Yep.
So, I mean, to get recouped on his costs, and who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct.
If he installs the entire road.
And in reality, that could be a selling point for the developer. I mean, honestly, if those existing landowners know that eventually down the road they want to develop, maybe they sell them some of that property at a prime rate or something. I just think that he can probably do something to get that property without having to have the county come in and force it.
So
why would we be forced to? I don't understand that, Greg. Was that Greg?
Yeah, I didn't get that.
Greg, I don't understand that.
It's going to be free market. The county's not going to impose anything on any requirements other than what's in ordinance. So
Yeah, that's why I see.
Are you telling me that the county wouldn't use eminent domain to force a lot owner number 5 to sell frontage of his property to help the developer?
No, I misunderstood that. Considering where it's at, what happened to bring that to standard, that would be an option. He's got a good point there. And that is something, if 6 of those 10 developers or lots went along with that, and 1 and 3 said, well, we're not going to go with it, we want to hold it up, to his point, wouldn't we go and do that? We probably would.
Use eminent domain?
Mm-hmm.
I'd struggle with that. Could we do it? But yeah.
We just did it.
Yeah, for Blanche.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But there were some other factors that entered.
There were, but it's a kissing cousin to this.
It's that at what point does the county come in and force and help out the developer and force the landowner to give up their property so the developer can maximize the property? I think that's the wrong use of eminent domain, but because the county's forcing a landowner to lose property simply to help out another one.
Well, and that particular case dealt with a substandard road, right difference on legal descriptions that we felt that the description was different than what some of the landowners out there did. So that came down to a legal description issue more than trying to help a developer.
I would also offer that if the standard, the adopted standard of the county is a certain width, and that's the width that we are using eminent domain to gain, it would have happened whether now or in the future, just
Correct.
because that developer at the end of the road is the trigger for it, doesn't necessarily mean it would have otherwise happened.
But to Greg's point, he's right. When does the county step in and when the county doesn't? Now, in this case, the one we're talking about, and I know Brad's on the line, but he bore the court costs. He ended up taking the guy to court, and once they made a decision about the right of way and where it should be, then we did come in at that point. But it was because at that point, literally, the road would have been out in the dirt.
Right. That's why I say it came down to the discrepancy in legal descriptions. Where
I mean, literally, it didn't work.
We were defending our road position.
We were. You're right.
Not necessarily defending a developer.
But they're kissing cousins here. Like I say, it's so close.
Yeah.
That to Greg's point, he's right on. And when do you and when don't you? And when you look at the condition of the roads out there, I suspect very similar circumstances could exist on lots of those roads, depending on who, what, and how. Yeah.
So I've got 3 options.
This is Commissioner Francis. So I guess maybe I didn't understand. Is there is or isn't a master plan? If there were a master plan, then an owner eventually of a property lot could expect that the road was going to have to be widened, correct? But if there's no plan, then there wouldn't be any expectation. So has there not been in place long enough that these lots with substandard roads are grandfathered in? There wasn't a plan for years and years and years, or what's the situation currently out there?
The master plan we've done, or road
These
widths in
old
those.
people that live there, do they have an expectation when they buy that this road is supposed to be at a certain width at a certain time?
Yes.
And they can expect that or not?
Yeah, so the answer to your question is today's adopted right-of-way standards, they are the standard that everybody can expect that their right-of-way to be converted to at some point in time. The question is, what's the trigger to define that point in time? Obviously, development has a very big to do with that. Safety also has a very big to do with that. And so if there's a right-of-way, let's say up in the Ogden Valley, what is that, 8600 East or whatever that is? I mean, in some places, I think we measured that there's 15 feet of asphalt, if you can even call it asphalt. And you've got some 90-degree angle turns with 15 feet of asphalt. You're never going to get a fire truck to be able to pass anybody on those curves. I think that everybody out there should expect that our existing right-of-way standard will eventually apply to that road. It's just a matter of finding the trigger or the trigger presenting itself for the county to implement that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And
I
when
do
it comes,
agree with Commissioner, is it Wyken? Is that how it's pronounced? Sorry, I'm sloppy that. And Commissioner Bell, though, that I think this is, as Commissioner Jenkins' point, this is a capitalist society, and if a developer, if lots or property of land is out there at a certain cost, then it makes sense for them to build, and with the expectation that they have to put the road in, I think they should have to put the road in. But, I don't think the other should have to be subsidizing his development or her development.
yeah, and that's kind of the trigger word is subsidizing. So I've got 3 options. I've got Commissioner Jenkins in the room with me. The other 2 commissioners, I think, had a meeting to run off to at 5 o'clock. But before I hit the suggestions, just to recap on where we are in the process. This has got to come back to the Western Weaver Planning Commission for a recommendation. Western Weaver Planning Commissioners are probably going to ask you to make a decision whether it be thumbs up or thumbs down, because I know this has been in play for a while and the commissioners have asked for it. It was almost a year ago, right, that they asked for it. So we want to get it in their hands. We just wanted to make sure the commissioners were very well aware of the Planning Commission's deliberation over this. Ogden Valley's concern, they did recommend approval, Commissioner Jenkins, but their primary concern was obligating people to not be able to protest a special tax in the future if the county decided to create a special assessment area. Western Weaver's concern was just the leapfrog development and how that just creates poor planning potential when it comes to sprawl. And instead, I think they would rather see things kind of organically expand. Okay, so 3 options. Number 1 is obviously keep the code as it is. If we haven't been very good at enforcing the code as it is, which is you can't develop if you're not going to bring the road to your. So some people say, well, we can't require them to build all that, and that's true. We can't. We cannot require what is not roughly proportionate to the impact of their development. However, the option to develop is theirs. It's their choice. And so if they do make that choice to develop, at that point, we can say, well, you can't unless the road is expanded to this. So we're not saying you have to expand the road, we're just saying you can't develop unless the road is expanded magically by someone. So that's option 1. Number 2 is the proposal that we ran through both planning commissions, which does say that the resulting lot owners, so not the developer, but the resulting lot owners will have a deferral agreement recorded to each of their properties that say that they're responsible for their roughly proportionate share of rebuilding that road to an accepted standard, and that if the county commission chooses to create a special assessment area, that they won't protest. And it's an either or. I mean, the county commission shouldn't require both, obviously. And then option 3, which is one that hasn't been presented to the planning commissions, is that if we can do a rough proportionality test, if we treat this road like it's a pipe and we're trying to get fluid through it, we say this is the maximum level of service, you cannot get any more water through this pipe at the flow rate that you want it to go through beyond X amount of level of service, then we can add a financial value to what that level of service is. And so if we know we've got 100 lots coming in, or we know that the zone allows at maximum build out 10,000 lots over in that area, we've got a number, and building a road that'll service 10,000 lots costs X amount of dollars. We've got a number that we can divide and then assign to each of those properties. Once that number is known, we would ask the developer to pony up that right then. And then the county would use that money, and it's not going to be enough to build the entire road because the developer's only doing 10 lots or 100 lots. But then the county would use that money to go and throw a little bit more shoulder down, put a little bit more compaction on the sides, fix guardrail, improve safety factors, stuff like that. And as each 10 lot, 20 lot, 100 lot comes in, that road will slowly improve issue by issue. What that would require us to do every time a developer comes in with a 10 lot or 100 lot is know the road well enough to know what to ask for.
Require a traffic study basically for every.
Require a traffic study and get a qualified traffic engineer to come in and tell us where the factors of safety are a problem and where the level of where the pinch points are.
We've got our own engineering department could do a substantial portion of that. Now, you know, certainly not to a level of UDOT would, but on some of these small roads, we could do some of that. So I don't like number 2. I don't like burdening. When you're in, you're in.
Right.
And I just think that's not right. But number 1 and number 3, I actually agree with both of those. You know, to Ms. Francis's comment about the road, you would be able to, if you had your master road planning done and knew what you had there, you would be able to go in, and you do to an extent because you know what you want these widths to be. You could go in there and say, well, okay, we anticipate that they'll come, this road will have to carry so much. And if you wanted to go in there and say, okay, that area right there, we're going to assess everybody who's in it this amount of money per acre or per lot, or however you chose to do it, to pay for that, sure. But isn't that pretty much the same thing as a impact fee? Yeah.
Very much the same. In fact, if we did that, we probably couldn't also charge an impact fee.
Right.
So,
well, that's my point. And people hate impact fees, but this is why they have them.
Well, the difference in your impact fee and your the other option is a lot of the impact, or a lot of the older existing ones didn't pay the impact fees, but you can go back and get the money from the existing ones with your special assessment, correct?
Yeah, or
that's your difference in it.
That's the difference.
Well, and the other challenge is that the state has pigeonholed impact fees so tight that you've got 6 years to spend the money, and you have to have already identified the infrastructure to invest it into. And you don't know where the 100-lot developer is going to be coming in. Are they going to come in on this road or that road over there? So you just guess based on where it seems like it's expanding to.
Sure, but as far as spending it, I don't. That's not an issue. We're always so far behind. That'd be easy to do.
So, question I have, Charlie, and maybe it goes.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
This commission, on these deferral agreements, how far does the obligation of one of these lot owners go? For example, as a hypothetical, a lot owner comes here and he buys lot 8 and he lives there. And it's later determined this is going to be a collector road. And he has signed a deferral agreement. He'll pay for all the curb gutter, sidewalk, and asphalt. But he had no idea it was going to be for a 4-lane collector road. Is he going to be obligated to pay for 4 lanes of asphalt?
That's an open-ended question that has yet to be answered. Our deferral agreements are not specific. They do not say improve to the standard that we would otherwise do today. They just say participate in your proportionate share in whatever the cost is in the future.
That'd probably be more of a legal issue when we get to that point, or if we ever did get to that point.
Yep.
Yeah, well, it seems appropriate in a deferral agreement to obligate somebody to the impact that he's going to put on that road. But for a collector road that benefits the general community or state, that seems pretty onerous.
And I think that's
any impact an individual lot owner would have, especially in Ogden Valley where you got 3-acre lots and lots of frontage.
Right, exactly. And I think that's what Rick is kind of meaning when it comes to a legal issue. We know that there's a lot of jurisprudence that says we cannot ask for more than what's reasonably related and roughly proportionate to the impact of that lot 8. And so if we were to come in and say, well, to expand your portion of the right of this new 6-lane superhighway is $80 million, that would definitely not be roughly proportionate, or very likely not reasonably related to his impact on the community. So I think it would flesh out when we go through the legal process.
Charlie, this is sorry to interrupt. To that point, that's where I'm struggling so much with this, is because I don't feel that at any point an existing landowner, let's say lot 8, should incur any undue cost or burden simply because a neighbor wants to develop their property. And especially out west, where people have lived in the same home for different generations, they never anticipated incurring that cost, and now it's being dumped on them in an unknown amount, whether it's 66 feet or 100 feet.
Yeah.
This is Charlie. This is Lackey.
Rod?
Just real quick, I have to agree with Commissioner Bell or Greg Bell. If you have a residence at lot number 8, you're basically asking them to pay to shrink their property. To me, that sounds like an invitation for a lawsuit, but that's just my opinion.
I think there might be just a little bit of misunderstanding, and no doubt about it, because this is a challenging issue. And if there was a solution to it, smarter people than me would have already come up with it. When it comes to lot owner number 8, he's already got a house on it. All of this right-of-way expansion or whatever, that wouldn't fall on him. In fact, he's already got a house on it. He's not creating any more impact on the road right-of-way than what he has always historically done. He's going to get a check from the county for this portion of his property, or a check from the developer if that's how it would work out. So he wouldn't be responsible for expanding that roadway. Let me put a caveat. Let me put a little caveat on that.
Unless he had a deferral agreement.
Unless, like Bren just mentioned, he already had a deferral agreement recorded to his property, or unless that roadway has always been to a substandard. If that roadway has never been to the standard that it needs to be to support what's out there now, there might be a little bit of financial obligation on the people who live there.
I can't imagine that. I suspect that courts would rule against the county every day in that kind of an action. And I also suspect the guy who owned Lot 8, he would be grandfathered in there. And say, look, he had a lot that was what do you call it? It's a
non-conforming.
No, it is a conforming lot.
Right.
Yeah, at the time he bought it and built home, it was conforming. So the fact that you now require an upgrade, I suspect the county would be responsible to put all that in, all the way, 100% of it.
I agree.
I know the city would be.
And
the only
to
reason
that
why I
point,
would
Commissioner
suggest
Jenkins, when he bought his lot and built his home on it, the road was standard.
Yep.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Good point.
So as long as it was standard when he bought it and put his home in. Yep.
But when you look at the widths of some of these, you talk about 15-foot roads. A lot of those, there wasn't even a standard at the time.
Yep.
That's correct.
It was just enough to maybe get 2 wagons past each other.
Well, or very small cars.
Right.
Nothing like what
Look at the cars from back then to today.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
Well, isn't it true that these standards are subjective and they change all the time?
Yep.
The 66-foot right-of-way standard may change to 80 tomorrow.
Yep. That's right.
Well, depending on how we zone it and what you call the road, he's absolutely right on.
Yep. Okay.
May I also, this is Commissioner Francis, may I also make another comment?
Go ahead, Commissioner.
I think, there again, planning is so important. And even deferrals, to me, can be very, very disruptive. In the beginning, they may seem like a good thing, but I just give a prime example that I've seen through the years, as old as I am. At the top of Washington Boulevard, you make a left on Fruitland Drive to go towards Weber High School. And North Ogden City had the foresight to make that road very, very broad and wide because they have apparently a transportation plan. And then as soon as it hits Pleasant View, it narrows down to just a very narrow roadway, and they just had to
Monroe's the same way through there.
pretty much
Yeah,
cut and paste
right.
as an expression to fix that and expand when they need to or whatever. But all the homeowners on the North Ogden end, they've had the expectation. They know what they were getting. They knew what they could do with their land. They have that advantage, where those in Pleasant View is very disruptive when they have to expand and equal the width, because that was a major thoroughfare.
That's right.
I just almost think it's better to do it in the beginning. People know what they're getting, they know what to expect, and they plan appropriately. I just think it's so important to make sure planning is done and people know what their expectations are, and when they build, they do what's necessary.
Right to your point, Shanna, the one of the amendments that we just made in the commercial zone, which I have every intention, if we can get to it in some of the other zones, We changed the setback requirements. We said you can have your building right at your front property line unless that roadway is planned to be wider, in which case you need to be set back a minimum of whatever that new right-of-way standard is. That way the county can make that expansion. Everybody has planned for it, and it's not disrupting everything.
Yeah, so wise to do that.
Well, I'd like to kind of hear maybe from the planning commissioners what your thoughts are on those three options. And before I ask that question fully, I almost think it might be better to take what we have now, get it in front of the county commission, and maybe have you say yay or nay. I don't know what the other two are gonna want out of that.
Sure.
And then if the answer is nay, we go back with option 3, because the other option 1, we already have, and retool it. Planning commissioners, what would you think about that?
I guess I'm confused on your question.
So my suggestion would be get it back in front of Western Weaver, have Western Weaver make a decision, whether it be thumbs up or thumbs down. Get it in front of the county commission and have them make a choice. And it's option 2. So is option 2 a viable option? It sounds like we probably got a nay vote, maybe. Don't want to obligate you to it.
Well, I kind of told you, I'm an open book on this stuff, you know?
Yeah, we just don't know where the other 2 would be, and I don't want to go back and rewrite it. I mean, I'm happy to, but rewrite it in order to get back to this point and find out the other 2 aren't supportive of the option 3.
I agree.
So, and we can always maybe work with them and see what they would think as well.
Visit with them individually.
Okay.
Because we can meet on it next week, can't we?
Yeah.
I was leaning for 3. I liked some of the points that you had in 3.
I like 3.
Okay, Shannon likes 3. Other planning commissioners?
I'll make a comment. So I like option 1, and I'll tell you just a couple of comments on why. It's because, to Commissioner Francis' point, we need to have a plan up front so that when people go into these areas, they know. So I'd like to table it, leave it where it is, update our general plan, make sure we have that road plan like you were talking about as part of our update, put that in place, make sure that people are aware of where they're living and what the road plan is for where they're living before they get tangled up into some of these complex issues.
I agree with Commissioner Bell. I think at this point, option 1, where supports our growth the best until we have a general plan laid out so people know what to expect.
Great, thank you. Other thoughts?
I feel the same way, Charlie.
Okay. I hear a lot of support for 1, a little bit of support for 3.
I don't think 3's a bad thing when the plan's in place for Western Weaver.
Right.
You get it in place.
Let's put the plan out there, and once the plan's in place, and I think that's kind of what Greg was saying, you know, we let them see what there's going to be before it goes to that point. So.
Okay.
Yes, that's exactly what I was saying.
Any dissenting opinions? I don't even know who we still have on the line.
So that board's full.
Yep. Okay. Well, we'll chat with the other 2 commissioners, see where they want to go from here. We might even have it on Western Weaver Planning Commission's agenda next week.
I think it'd be a good thing.
All right.
Be a quick discussion, I think.
Perfect.
Appreciate your comments.
Moving on.
Moving on, go ahead.
Okay. You have to remind me what it is.
PRUD.
Oh, thank you.
May I make a comment backpedaling just for a moment on your drainage facilities?
Sure. Go ahead.
I wondered if, I liked where you were going with that and how you're treating that. I think that's fair to the farmers out there. I wondered though if there were any other considerations that might not have come up that would be of issue. I wondered if you had contacted the Weber Soil Conservation District to see, just run it by them, just for some input, if there were any other issues that might be important that might be being overlooked by chance.
No, I'd be happy to ask him.
Sounds great.
Yeah, that's not a bad suggestion.
Okay.
So Commissioner, on the PRUD, this is before your time, and the...
I know, I hate it.
I know. Me too. And at that time, we talked, right now, as a PRUD ordinance stands, it's very difficult to deny a PRUD. It's an administrative approval. It does require your approval, but it's a conditional use permit. And as a conditional use permit, the only way it can be denied is if they can't adequately address life safety issues, such as they can't address sewer and water, or something that's a life safety issue. Otherwise, it just has to be approved. We had proposed a long time ago to look at PRUDs as being a legislative item, possibly some type of overlay zone, so it couldn't be approved carte blanche everywhere. They had to come in and go through almost like a rezone process to get it approved. And we're wondering what your flavor is on that. If you want us to go back and look at it through those lenses, which would allow, because right now if public comes in and complains about a PRUD, when we have that, there's really nothing that can be done to deny it at that time.
Yeah.
And so we're wanting to know, where you're at on that.
So these are rights these people have, and if we allow them to do PRUDs, they have that right. So I don't want to get in the middle of that. I just don't care for them. And I'll be honest with you, you guys know me, and you know where I live, and you know where I come from. And so when I look at West Weber County, I look at Plain City 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And I like third and half-acre lots. I like that rural feel. I like how how a little community grows and matures into that. And that's, I come by that by living in there and my background and the time I spent in government there. So I'm not saying I'm right and that I'm the only way. Lots of people view other things and other ways of developing, and there's other good ways. And I've been in lots of other planned communities. When you look at the one that they did down there in Kennecott,
Oh, yeah.
Daybreak. It's a cool community. I really like the way it turned out. It was neat, but that was a whole different vision that was seen out there than what we've had here traditionally. And I'm not saying that wouldn't work. It would work just fine. Just not something I'm used to, So I don't know. That's me. So there you go. Anyway, I would love to see us in this new master plan upgrade that we're looking at out west. If you say, well, how do you see that happening? I'd love us to see us go in there and zone areas, third-acre lots and half-acre lots, and allow
put residential zones out there.
Yeah, Yeah, exactly.
There needs to be an R zone in Western Weber County.
Yeah.
I would like to do that.
And maybe what we do is we wait until we do the general plan to ask some of these questions and get that out there before we come
Well, I
back.
anticipate when we do that general plan, that's exactly what will go into it.
Yep.
Just what he said, what Chair Edwards said.
Okay.
As far as the PRUD code goes, I agree. Right now, as long as we leave it on the books, it's an entitlement that someone can ask for, and it makes it look like the way that it reads, it basically makes it seem like the county commission, through approval, can modify or waive whatever other requirement we've already adopted in code. There are some legal concerns, legal questions on whether or not the county can do that, whether it be do that without making a legislative decision to change ordinances. So one thing that we're suggesting is change it. I mean, if you want to keep PRUD, keep it in the code and just change it to an overlay zone, or rename it and make some adjustments to it and call it the master plan development overlay zone. If we had a master plan development overlay zone, there could be a lot of flexibility induced in whatever development comes. For example, you might not have been here when we were talking about the movie studio. Were you here for that? Mm-hmm. If we had an ordinance for that, we could have just done master plan overlay zone, a commercial master plan overlay zone there.
So
same kind of subject.
If somebody come in and asked for that, and why wouldn't we go there and rezone them? If we felt like that was something that needed to be or could be or was opportunity or whatever, why wouldn't you want to force us as a community into rezoning it? I like that. I think it's good to force the planning commission into making a decision and thinking about it, and the commission into making that decision. Mm-hmm. I don't think we should run from these things. I think that we should sit here and vote and show people why we changed our mind or why we decided to give that. A good example is that piece right across, what was that guy's name?
Costesso.
Huh?
Or Baugh.
Baugh, Dan Baugh. Yeah. A lot of people are upset at us that we rezoned that. And I understand, and there's nothing wrong with those people holding me to account for that. I made that decision, and as long as they don't shoot me or throw rocks at me, you know. But for them to say that damn Commissioner Jenkins rezoned that, there's nothing wrong with that. I feel like that's part of the scrutiny that I have to stand up against. And same thing with you guys as commissioners. So to change a zone, I just don't see it as being that big of a deal. But I do think it's important that we stand up and be counted and don't just slide it in. That's why I like
change the zone if it's needed.
Yeah, if it's needed. That's why I think it's important that we do those things.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important right now that we update the general plan out there so it gives direction on where things should happen.
Right.
And then when things come in, then we can say, hey, the general plan.
So over in Plain City, we decided years and years ago that we didn't want downtown where the city park was to grow anymore commercially. That we could see the way things were growing, that eventually that would change. So we went out to 3,500 where that road went through and put a big circle in there and said, okay, we view this as our future commercial area. And you can see it today, 20 years later. That's where the store is, and the school's out there, and there's a church right there, and that's developing into our little commercial area. And I like that. I think that was really smart, something that we did there.
So it sounds to me like what you're saying would probably be supportive of going to a master plan overlay zone, like a rezone, instead of entitled PRUD. Because the entitled PRUD, there's so much flexibility built into that, and we already know that state code has been changed, and it's been changed based off of historic legal precedents, that if the code says you've got that there's multiple ways to read the code, we've got to err in favor of the applicant. And if the applicant gets into our current PRUD code and says, well, look, any of these standards can be waived or modified, so I want them waived and modified this way, it gets really hard once it gets to the county commission.
Right.
Just like kind of like what you saw today in your meeting this morning.
Well, I'll tell you, this came back to me in spades when we were dealing with this road with Brad Blanche and that Mr. Hipple, I think it was.
Yeah.
He looked at us and he said, if you zone that down there like Plain City, 3rd-acre lots, he said, I wouldn't even object to it. I said, what are you talking about? He says, that's it. He said, I'd have signed that over and we'd do that deal right now. I thought, my gosh, here we are just beating our heads against the wall for something that if we had zoned it right, would have gone through just like that. So that's why I think this master plan, I think we should do this right now. And I don't want to get into changing anything until that's here. And then if everybody agrees and we can come to a unified decision here, I think this will all unfold all on its own.
Perfect.
Yep.
Commissioner Jenkins, am I able to make a comment? This is Brad Blanche.
Sure, Brad, go ahead. I'm not as sticky as some of these others. Go ahead.
So everything that you're saying about third and half-acre lots, I 100% concur with. It would make development so much easier, so much more standardized, and you can plan better and plan ahead. I think that it would be, a master plan community is also a great idea. We don't do very much master planning in Weber County, meaning kind of what you see in other areas where they've taken into consideration residential and some commercial that goes with it. I think those kind of standards, for me personal, the project, my name keeps coming up on a project that's off of a substandard road.
Yeah.
I think that would have solved a ton of problems.
I can't argue that, Brad.
So we got the general plan process that we're going to have unfold over the next period of time. In the meantime, we've still got PRUD on the books. How would you feel? The planning commissioners have already forwarded a recommendation to repeal PRUD and replace it with something else, a legislative overlay zone, essentially. Would you rather keep PRUD on the books in the meantime?
So you guys voted to do that?
This was
to send that to us?
It's a year and a half
to do away with it.
Before some of them were.
Yeah.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, Brett was on.
Yeah, we voted to pull it off. I mean, some of my problems with the PRUD is essentially we're giving them bonus density to put in infrastructure that's required in every subdivision. Sidewalk, stuff like that. Why are we giving them 20% bonus density to put in something that they're already going to have to do regardless?
Yeah.
So yeah, it needs to go away.
Our PRUD bonus points is very weak. We give bonus points for street trees. It's.
And if you talk to the county,
what you just said, I'd be very supportive of.
Okay.
Do you want us to touch that before we do the general plan, or wait?
Well, I just can wait, but I see kind of where Charlie's going. He said, well, in the meantime, what do we do with things that are in the pipeline coming down the line?
well, you can't. I think if they're in the works, they're grandfathered in. We can't not do it, but we won't have any more applications come in as a PRUD if we can pull it off for the time being.
I think you better talk to the other two, but I would be very supportive of what Chair Edwards just said.
Okay, good.
Commissioner Jenkins, can I make a statement?
Sure. Who's this?
This is Rhonda Kippen.
Hello, Rhonda.
I would support you in keeping the PRUD on the books until we do get the Western General Plan in place, so that we do have something to go off of. Because in the meantime, Ogden Valley, we do not get any bonus density at all. And so it's only in the Western Weaver that we actually get bonus density. And so by leaving it on the books until we get the general plan in place, it will give us better direction on how to handle these, because in the meantime, we will have no tools to utilize other, obviously, I feel the best route is like you said, to rezone it and come with a conceptual plan and layout so that everybody knows what's going, and that's more in line with the master plan development. The PRUD has major defaults and major issues that do need to get resolved, but that can take up to a year and a half to rewrite that ordinance. And in the meantime, we've got developers who will be having their hands tied, waiting for something to move their processes forward. And so I think until we get that general plan in place, it would be prudent to keep something on the books that the developers could utilize.
Thank you.
I agree with Rhonda, and that's why I wouldn't suggest we do a repeal of PRUD. My suggestion would be to pick it up from where the Planning Commission left off in their recommendation and change it to a legislative decision. A tool stays in the toolbox. The County Commission and the Planning Commission has the flexibility and the ability to shape whatever master plan comes in with each of these developments through a development agreement or through negotiation of some sort. There's no obligation for the County Commission and the Planning Commission to say, well, I guess our hands are tied. Everybody hates it and we don't want it, but I guess we have to approve it if we're to make that change.
I think once we get a new general plan out there, I think once you start seeing some R zones out in Western Weber County, I don't think you'll see people want to use that as a tool anymore, that or the clustering.
Yeah.
I think you're gonna,
I think
it's gonna go more, there's multiple out there right now that, I don't agree with the clustering going because we've had this discussion over what's prime agricultural. Well, none of it's prime. It all needs to be houses in my opinion,
Good point.
Okay.
Well, Commissioner, we appreciate your time on this.
Okay, glad to do it.
The last item on the agenda is more for the Ogden Valley Planning Commission. Do you want to turn the time over to John Lewis?
Yeah.
And then we can excuse the others?
You bet. Go ahead, John. We'll turn time over to you.
Okay. Hang on one sec. Okay, so for this last bit, we're going to go to the Eden Small Area Plan, work session number 3. So those who are interested in the small plan for Eden, stay on. Charlie, are you going to be presenting this?
Yes. Sorry, I forgot you could hear me. I was going to unmute you. So it'll be myself and Steve Burton. There's Steve right there. What Steve and I have to show you guys today is the next iteration in the process towards creating a small area plan and a development code that can help implement a small area plan. One place that I had the opportunity to study this last summertime was a resort gateway community in Colorado. And many of you have passed through it or been there. It's Glenwood Springs. And if you've ever had the opportunity to walk their downtown area or to go over to their 7th Street, which is on one side of the river, or their 6th Street, which is on the other side of the river, I would hope that you would have the same opinion that they did a pretty good job in creating design standards and implementing them. So what Steve has, and what he's going to show you guys, is their design standards, kind of walk you through them just to let you get familiarized with what they have. In my opinion, and maybe Steve shares the same opinion, their standards I think are a little bit more robust than we're going to want to adopt. They get into some of the nitty-gritty that I don't know that we need to get into. But when you look at a document like this, I don't know exactly what the laws of Colorado say for land use development. But what I would suggest we do, at least what I'm thinking right now, is we would adopt these design standards, not as guidelines, but as standards that would be, not these ones per se, ones that we choose to put in, as standards that go right into the village overlay zone. So at some point we'll have Old Town Eden or New Town Eden village overlay zones. They will have their standards for their respective areas that would then be applied to whatever development comes in the future in those areas. So once again, we're not suggesting that all these standards be implemented. We're just showing you an example of how another community has chosen to implement them. So Steve, take it away.
Oh, okay. Hi, Commissioners. It's good to see all of you. This is just kind of a recurring conversation we're having with you at the Ogden Valley Planning Commission because, as you know, a few years ago, we started the process in looking at Old Town Eden and adopting some kind of a form-based code. And we've talked to you a little bit about what that is, what form-based code is, I think a few times, but just maybe to kind of remind you, I've got the existing, I'm going to show you what the difference is just a little bit. We've got the existing code that we have that we refer to as like Euclidean zoning from the 1950s when counties and cities first adopted zoning rules, which basically you've got a purpose and intent, you've got setbacks, and then you've got a whole list of uses that you can have and that you can't have and that you can't have with the conditional use permit. What's nice, at least for me, why I like form-based code is some of you know that I'm a simple man. I prefer images that capture what an area should look like instead of what uses should be in an area. And so Glenwood Springs was kind enough to send us over a Word, in Word format, their design standards, which are a good example of like a form-based code. So I'll show you kind of the difference here. You've got a map that shows where this code applies, where these guidelines apply, and then you'll start to see buildings and streetscapes and plans for pedestrian-friendly, a walkable community, which the current, Euclidean zoning really kind of focuses more on the use and maybe on parking, where this is really focused on, like I said, the way a building looks or the way a street looks. We just wanted to show you an example of what a form-based code in Old Town Eden or any of the area plans could look like, and I'll scroll through a couple of these. And as I'm scrolling, you can let me know if you have any questions, or Charlie can jump in at any time, but you'll see that they're talking about a specific area and the way they want the buildings to look in that specific area.
Hey, Steve.
Also,
Steve, roll back just a little bit, because I think this is important here. So we've got design standards in our architectural and design, our design review standards in our code. So these would be similar, but what they're doing is they're showing very vaguely showing kind of how your mass of your building can sit on the property, where the setbacks are, how the property can be laid out, without, in these pictures, without saying this is exactly what you're going to build. So it's just giving you kind of a range of options. So scroll down just a little bit, Steve. So where did we go? Where did it go? There, here we are. So you're looking here, defining the buildable area, defining height, property lines. You see over on the right-hand side, example C, if you go up to the table, it talks about transitions between, two single-family zoning districts, so transitions between the 6th Street corridor commercial buildings and the residential districts next door. And it talks about, in the table, it talks about those standards and how they can be applied. Go ahead, Steve. I just wanted to point that out.
Awesome. Yeah, and it also show, obviously diagrams of how the street should be aligned and different improvements in the street. Here it's talking about a plaza or some kind of a public space that the building could open up to on the street. Here you're looking at different alleyways that are meant for, pedestrian, walking through different districts. Mid-block, we're taking into consideration what's happening in mid-block. Do we want a drive-through area in mid-block where everybody would park, so that you're not just seeing a giant parking lot when you're driving by this area that could kind of be like a downtown Main Street public space. They have options. There's options. You can have public art, you can have landscaping, some kind of decorative fencing. You can hear it actually down here a little ways. It talks about the different characteristics of each building. What kind of roof it should have, what kind of material it should be made of, and obviously it's going to give options. We don't want each building to look identical, but in general, I think it helps. You're going to get some continuity in the way these buildings look, and it's going to have a little character to it. I know in the general plan, the Ogden Valley General Plan, it talks about these areas, Old Town and New Town Eden, having their own specific design standards. We talked a little bit last work session about the design standards in Old Town Eden. Generally, it should look like it's from the 1890s to the early 1900s, with that kind of the old West mine town kind of a feel to it. And so rather, obviously, like we're showing here, rather than a zoning ordinance that has, just a list of can and can'ts, we've got options here, ways buildings should look. So we just wanted to kind of whet your palate, I guess, a little bit and let you know this is an option if when we move forward with area plans. A small area plan could look something like this.
Steve, go back to the building mass and scale. So the building mass and scale in Old Town and New Town Eden is going to be very critical, so that we maintain that rural type atmosphere. But we're also going to want to try to pack in as much density in that area so we can preserve the farmland out in that area. And so we may be looking, the buildings along the streetscape being, 2 stories, but as you move inward, you pick up some more height. So as you're driving along that area, it reads more as a 2-story building area, whereas on the interior of that area, you hide that and pick up more of the mass in that area. And so the building mass and scale becomes very critical when we start looking at how development happens in the Ogden Valley, so it doesn't read as 4, 5, 6-story buildings in that area, but we're able to hide that on the interior portion of the block.
Like Charlie pointed out, this is pretty intense as far as what we would be looking at. It probably wouldn't be 30 pages, but in general, you'd be focusing on building massing, the things that Rick and Charlie just went over. So, do the commissioners? Do you guys have any specific questions on this, or any feedback you'd like to give?
This is Commissioner Burton. I've got a couple of comments. Is that appropriate now?
Sure.
Okay. It seems like nobody has a corner on successful creativity, something that will work. Creativity means everybody gets to kind of figure out, to create, to discover. This idea, it seems like, it is trying to require standards that were freely created when there were no standards. And now you have to follow these standards and you can't create anything different from what the standards are. So that seems to me to take away the ability from developers or landowners creating something that nobody else has thought of. It's kind of it seems like the Disneyland approach. Everything has got to look like this Disneyland. And nobody can create something other than what somebody has decided it ought to look like. So it seems to me it's kind of shooting ourselves in the foot if we say we want to be creative, but it has to look like this. When it was mentioned, I think you just mentioned that the buildings ought to be taller in the middle of the block and shorter on the corners. Well, I'm familiar with I just learned of a development down in Salt Lake. It's the second east, second south area where the county or the city, I guess, is required that the buildings on the corners be taller and the buildings in the middle of the block be shorter. And the developers that own the middle of the block want them to be taller now, and those on the corners want to be shorter to work with their creative plans, and they're having a fight. Of course, we're talking about the opposite thing. But I suggest that if we want creativity, we don't stifle it by saying it has to look like something that's already been created. So that's just my observation.
I appreciate that.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah.
Just to kind of respond to Commissioner Burton, because we kind of keep going down the same road, I think, often. And I get that. I certainly don't like being stifled. I like being creative. But I really don't like looking at the four-way down there where you have log cabins next to a log building, next to a modern building, across the street from a stucco building, next to a one-story, and behind it is a Boston brick-looking facade. I mean, there's no connectivity then. And everyone got to be, really creative, great. But now we have a hodgepodge. So it's kind of like, okay, well, how do you let people be creative and still have some kind of conformity? Just something that blends it together somewhat. And I know you can go too far with that, which I think is what Commissioner Burton's issue is. But if you completely take the reins off, now we're back to everyone does everything, no matter what, can't say no, and off we go with pink elephants. So I like your approach that you're trying to give some kind of box to work in and say, okay, you can do whatever you want inside the box, but you got to stick with, 19th century or whatever it's going to be. Otherwise, we're just going to get complete creative hodgepodge. And I just don't know if that's what we want. So that's my 2 cents.
Commissioner Lewis, may I also address that? I don't know how many of you have been to or taken a critical look at Farmington, I believe it's Farmington, that has some really great standards in their community. For instance, the commercial buildings have the local gray stone. There again, there's a lot of room for creativity, yet it's all pulled together with some continuity, which makes it a beautiful commercial area down there. They're again well thought out and some pulled together. It's meaningful. And it might seem this is a silly analogy, but just like a kite, if you just let it go wherever, it usually will come crashing down to the ground. But if you put enough, just a little bit of tension and hold that string, it can soar, and it's a beautiful thing when you fly a kite. And I think that's, I would like to see, in your words, Commissioner Lewis, that there's a box that we work within, but you can still extend your creativity. Thank you.
It just has to be a balance, that's all.
Yeah. And I don't know if creativity would be really the word. I would say that this whole area plan is designed around. I think it's really it's meant to have a standard that people have to meet, that developers would have to meet. And it really comes from the stakeholders that we met with 2 years ago, who have property in this area, who told us, no, we don't want people to build whatever they think is creative. We want them to build something that fits in architecturally with the rest of the buildings. And so what we've heard is there should be some standard. And it should be a certain time period, and the buildings should fit well with each other. We've shown a few, I think a couple of meetings ago, we've shown a few buildings, how they can look different, but they can also fit in well with each other. In resort communities, I think it was like Whitefish, Montana, we got some pictures from, and there were some different buildings that looked, you had a brick building, and then right next to it you had a building that was made of wood, and it just similar to the blacksmith shop and the general store. They go pretty well together. And so, we certainly wouldn't want to leave it free and open for anybody to decide how they want their building to look. And again, that's coming from the stakeholders that we've met with. So,
yeah. John Howell.
Hey, John.
I concur with Steve. You have to have standards. People will start putting modern stuff right next to some turn of the century type building, like they did up in Park City, right in the old town. Put that modern building right in the middle of it, and they could have had the old time facade, but they didn't. And when they built the new part down below, it's all looks like turn of the century, but it's all brand new, you know. And if anybody's ever been in Sisters, Oregon, there's a prime example of that town, that all different kinds of buildings, and it looks like the turn of the century there.
You know, if you want a good example of how standards can help accentuate creativity, take a little drive up to Morgan City and drive down on Main Street. There is a beautiful complex. It's got a gym in it. It's got a few other commercial facilities. And right next door is an even newer building. But the newer building is a pre-manufactured steel building. It's got a little bit of rock wainscot on the front of it, but as you're driving by, you can clearly see that it is essentially a barn. I saw the same thing when looking at Glenwood Springs. On the way to Glenwood Springs, there's a little town called Rifle. And the town of Rifle has, as you're driving down Interstate, 70, towards Glenwood Springs, on the right-hand side, you see this really kind of creative-looking, bright blue barn. And you know, it's not the barn that we like to see in the Ogden Valley. It was the really low-pitch roof, pre-manufactured steel building. And as I drove by, there was just a great, an interesting sign on it. It was a Sears department store. And it was really interesting to see a Sears department store in one of those metal corrugated steel buildings as kind of a commercial staple for a community. It looked cheap, I think is what I'm trying to say there.
I guess my point was, as Commissioner Burton, if we had standards that everything has to look the same, we'd all be living in 18th century buildings right now.
And I guess the intent of this specifically towards like a commercial downtown area. But yeah, I think you're right, Commissioner Burton. You know, we would be living in older buildings that looked older. But I think this is really meant for a very specific area, really just kind of these two streets. I appreciate the comments.
And I'm not suggesting I don't like what your plans and examples show. It's very beautiful.
So there are standards, and then there's standards. They don't have to all look alike. You go to some of these old towns and they don't look like each building looked like it did. That's how they built in those days.
Yeah, the important thing here is that we don't get too specific on this, because you want variety. If every facade looks the same, has the same material, that's not what we're looking for. We're trying to get variety and allow some flexibility with some accountability at the same time.
Hey Steve, can you give me control? I want to give everyone just a photo tour of a community that I discovered.
Well, that building style like that can be accomplished. Each building being built has to come before the county and they can look over the standard of the building or what they want to build and have suggestions on changing or have it quite, they can all be different.
Let's see. Can we all see this? There we go. So there was this really interesting town called Leadville, Colorado, that I ran across. Let's see if I can get us down into the downtown area. Here we are.
Leadville? I've been there.
It's high altitude up in the mountains. Definitely the architectural era that we're looking at, but a lot of different individual choices on colors there. A lot of freedom, to choose that. As yet, let's see. Let me make sure I'm looking in the right direction here. Now, this is a really small town. Sorry?
I say all those buildings are not the same, but they have the same style of sorts because they were built in that era.
Right. They stay inside of a box. Now, this is the government building.
Yeah, so you made a mistake.
It's kind of what I'm thinking too. Let's go down the street just a little bit so you can see a little bit more of what we're talking about here. A lot of eclectic ideas on how to present their community. Now, we're not going to suggest, in case anyone who's on the line is concerned about huge buildings, we're not going to suggest a lot of height. I do think we're going to want to have a limitation on the height. Obviously, you guys as the Planning Commission can tell us whether or not we're up in the night about that. But you go from a main street area like this, and this is a really wide main street, and then, really cool, really great buildings, and then the post office. And you see how when something was modernized, actually I think that's a bank, but when you see how these buildings, they weren't brought up to the street right of way, they didn't kind of fit within the box, just how different the feeling is right as you're walking in this area as opposed to where we just were over here. So emphasis on the public realm as opposed to the interior of the buildings and what's happening inside the buildings. Not too concerned about it. And you've got tall and you've got short. I think that we'll leave a lot of those options without messing with them. But just some ideas here. The only thing that I think this street is missing is trees.
Hey, Charlie, do you mind me piping in here?
That's up to Commissioner Chair Lewis.
Chair Lewis, do you mind me piping in here real quick? I've actually been to Leadville. It actually it's so rich in architecture and what Charlie was pointing out is very true. The key thing that is I wanted to point out is how he said with all of the buildings up there on the street fronts, all of the parking is hid behind. So all of the public parking on the older buildings is literally tucked behind the alleyways, and it's very walkable. It's actually the highest incorporated city in the United States. And anyway, it's a really fun town to be in, but as he pointed out, the modernized areas are pushed back and the parking is brought there in the front, and it's just evident where they did bring in the new era, and it sticks out like a sore thumb. And then you go into the old area, and everything is just very walkable. You park your car, and it's very accessible to go into all of the old museums and shops and eateries. And anyway, it all fits together. Even though there's some very creative colors, it fits.
the Google Street View car that we're looking at, the fisheye lens really doesn't do this street justice. You're really, as you're driving down, you're hugged on both sides by these beautiful buildings. It's not quite as open as it looks here. And then as I drove through, I was like, wow, what a cool town on the top of what felt like the largest mountain. And then I got right here and I was like, gosh, that was a missed opportunity. Yeah.
There's the big mistake.
Yep.
If you let them do it.
Yep, you got it. What this does...
Build many. John Howell.
Sorry, John. Go ahead, John. Sorry, I think I was talking. Oh, go ahead.
A sore thumb.
Yep. Sorry, John, I was talking over you. There's a couple of things that this does. As pedestrians are walking or as people are driving, it obviously interrupts the flow and the feel of the community, but it also celebrates the... it almost displays cars in that parking lot as if we're celebrating that we are a car community. Now, everybody in this community has to have a car. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, and so you can't say this is a carless community, obviously. But there's so much missed opportunity in your ability to capture retail, to capture incredible commercial uses on this ground floor here, if your leading icon out here is a sea of cars and asphalt. So anyway, these are just the things that we've kind of been talking about for, I don't know, a year or two, I guess. And we're just trying to kind of guide you through how we're thinking that this can be created and implemented. Hopefully...
Charlie, Jeff Burton again.
Yes.
Not to be contrary, but I look at that parking lot in front of that building and I say, oh, that's an inviting place for me to unload my kids and not have them stepping out in the street and getting run over. That's a safe place for me. I like that. So there's lots of different, if I were a developer and I wanted to attract people that wanted to park in a safe place to visit my business, I would like a parking lot out in front, perhaps. So lots of different ways to look at this.
Yeah, a lot of perspectives, and thank you. Okay.
Well, the thrust of the is rural. Everybody keeps forgetting that. Rural, remember that.
Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Yeah, this is Chris Hogue. Probably one thing that's got me a little bit concerned, and I'm not sure what the right answer is that much of what you're showing here, I mean, I can understand the architecture style and so on as being, trying to be consistent, but thinking about, say, Old Town Eden, and of course I live within a stone's throw of the park, so I start to think now, it looks to me like what's, say, the Leadville and any of these cities or towns, they're all an incorporated kind of a town. Eden is not, so maybe that's down the road someday, sure, but how do we incorporate rural Eden into or how do we, it seems like the reality of having significant commercial development in Old Town Eden, it's not going to be an overnight process, I wouldn't think, at least unless something really changes dramatically, but it seems like there's a little bit of I'm not sure what the right word is, a challenge in my mind to incorporate what's already around and maybe incorporate a little bit of commercial into the general area and have some standards for it, but there's still a lot of homes and properties that are all around that, and And where do you go with that? That's part of the challenge that I see in my mind, anyway.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. That's actually, as we look at an attempt to create an organic evolution of a village or a future village area, we need to be cognizant and respectful of those who are there now, and ensure that whatever phasing plan respects that. If you remember from what we were talking about, a possible phasing plan was essentially we're only focused on that street that is just west of the park, and really just sticking with the park block. So the street that's west of the park, what is that, 5500 East or something like that, and then the street that's north of the park, and only for the width of that park, which I think we've got. I think there are 2 residences that we'll have to work with those landowners to make sure that we're not stepping on their toes. And then the 30-year plan, or maybe it's a 100-year plan, I don't know, would be as those residential landowners choose to be drawn into this village core, they would then have the option to ask for a little bit more density with transferable development rights, or commercial property, or whatever it may be. So instead of pushing people out because we're not allowing them to be what they want to be right now, it's giving them an alternative for the future when and if they choose to sell or do something different. But thank you very much for the comments. Anybody else?
Hey Charlie, just take a picture, take a screenshot of that street in your mind.
Okay.
I could drive a semi or a big swather or something down that street.
Yep. Oh, sorry. I pushed the wrong button.
Okay.
Yeah, you can.
According to, that's a nice wide street. It's not a transportation bottleneck. And I'm thrilled to see that Leadville has not a transportation bottleneck there. I just wanted you to put that in your thought bank.
Yeah, thank you.
As you consider parking and necking down that roadway.
I appreciate that. That's a really great observation.
And you look at the history of Washington Boulevard, and in its early days, it had angle parking along the sides of the road. And then as time progressed, it's went to parallel parking in that area. And so, in this situation, you look at this picture and you see parallel parking in Leadville with a bike lane on the side of that. And so these are all options that, we'll be throwing out at you.
Yeah, the sky's the limit as far as options go. We'll give you what our preferred alternative, but we don't live there, so we want to make sure we're planning in the way that you guys want things to be planned out. Check out this boardwalk. I mean, that's Jackson Hole-esque, but I'm sure that's something that's been there for quite some time. I just thought that was pretty cool. Covered walkway. Yeah. I mean, a lot of snow up in this area in the wintertime, so it'd be nice to have a covered walkway. Okay.
Looks good, guys.
Thank you. That's what we have for you, John. Back to you.
The altitude there is 10,000 feet.
Yeah, well, Charlie and Steve, thank you for that. We appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and ask, is there any other remarks from planning commissioners tonight?
I would just say well done. Thank you for all the work on this.
You bet. Thank you.
You're here.
You're here. Director Grover, any further comments?
So we're going to be refining this and getting some more detail to you in the near future. So just hold on. You'll see it probably, I would guess, sometime in February.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. How about legal counsel? Portland, any further remarks?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right, well, I'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks.
Appreciate your time. Have a great night.
Bye.
Let's hold your feet to the fire.
I was waiting to hear what you're gonna say. Like, say March, 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 say March.